Welcome to the PI Podcast, Political Insights for the Palagi Inis. I'm your host, Matt, and with me is my co-host, political scientist, meme lord, and under the Witness Protection Program for attempting to burn the Snyder Cut, Borge.
I haven't watched it.
but you wanted to burn it because you hate it anyway.
Wait. How long is it? They said it's 4 hours.
Yeah.
Is it available on? I'm gonna get it from Putlocker.
It's a great film. Why you try to burn it, huh? Deny it all you want. I know. All right.
PI nyo, PI nating lahat. Borge here at your service.
Yes, this is episode 11. Wow, it's a long time. But before we get to this, the main topic of the episode, we'd like to announce that we have just finished recording our first collaboration. Our first time. With who did we collaborate with?
We collaborated with ANEK, a never-ending kwentuhan, with John and Brian.
Yeah, two very intelligent people,
Yep.
but also very chill people. Like,
Very.
you
chill.
know this that the never-ending kwentuhan is actually a very it's almost like similar to what I envisioned this podcast to be. It's as they tackle actually. They're very chill, parang usapang inuman. But they discuss really high-level ideas in a casual way. And we actually talked. You remember what we talked about? And then how we talked about it.
Well, I think we talked about flame wars. I think we tackled the psychological dimensions of it, cultural dimensions of it, the ethical dimensions of flame wars. It was a fruitful collaboration. So we're looking forward for another one. And I think tayo sa susunod, so we would be the one to host the next one.
Yeah, so look forward to that, and we'll give you the link to their page so you can follow them, check out their stuff, and check out our collaboration on Flame Wars, and wait for the time where they'll be our guests later in the future. So yeah, look forward to that.
Yep.
And our official collaboration name is ANEK ng PI. In vernacular, it fits very well. Our themes fit very well. So yeah, but for this episode, we are talking about colonialism. That what has triggered this debate on colonialism lately?
I think we had the 500th anniversary of Magellan's arrival in the Philippines. So again, Magellan can be called as an explorer. You can dub him as an explorer. And again, I would leave it to the historians to discuss what on God's name Magellan actually was. But yes, I think it triggered some debates among scholars. But I think for ordinary Filipinos, that's one part of commemoration. One part of the commemorative celebrations is the arrival of the ship Elcano. And again, it's named after Magellan's assistant partner, who actually was the one who circumnavigated the world, Sebastian Elcano, if I'm not mistaken. So the ship arrived here, I think March 16, right? March 16. Exactly. Yes. The exact date that Magellan landed here in soon-to-be Philippines during his time. So,
because this is a special year, actually, 2021, we're going to discuss in succeeding videos. This is going to be the first of many that will discuss our colonial past, because it's not only the 500th anniversary of that, but also technically the arrival of Christianity. And we're going to have episodes on dissecting Christianity in the Philippines. So look out for that.
Yep.
But for now, the reaction, especially on the internet, causing a bit of a flame wars as well. It's basically quite humorous as well. Like, apparently, it's like the Spanish are coming back, simply saying, "Oh, there's a rematch." And there's some even comments about the crew of the Elcano. Apparently, they're thirst posting and about the crew, because there happen to be handsome Spaniards on board.
Yep.
Muy caliente.
So yeah.
But yeah,
it's basically a Freudian case of aggression and horniness at the same time.
Oh my. Apparently, there are people who both are angry at the Spanish but also desire them. Anyway, but honestly, like, I actually had a few discussions with this with a few people on the internet as well. Not necessarily flame war, but it kind of makes us to ask you the question. Well, I see this commemoration as not only a PR stunt for, of course, the embassy of Spain. It's of course, you can see it's shady, but it's somewhat harmless because it's more than just like the arrival of Magellan is not just colonialism. It was expeditionary, of course, but really what it also represents is the ingenuity of man. It's the first. Well, of course, you can argue that there have been other circumnavigations by certain individuals, but I suppose this was the first deliberate circumnavigation, by a particular voyage and a particular team. Some people may have done it by accident. Some people have done it out of circumstance. Even beyond Marco Polo, this one was this should be a
To
celebration
recognize, I
of
think.
yeah, it's it should be recognized that it is the for the possible like a circumnavigation for the world. So I don't know, what do you think about that? Because the
Hmm.
tainting of colonialism
Hmm.
is a bit over exaggerated. Personally, what do you think?
I don't think it is exaggerated. Well, again, at that point, it's to an extent relatively common knowledge that the world is round, so it only takes. But yes, we recognize this the sense of courage behind the entire expedition because they didn't know that the Pacific Ocean was that big. I don't know,
Yeah.
or either that, or they just dismissed earlier
Mhm.
calculations on how big the world actually was, ancient
Right.
calculations, really. So,
Mm-hmm.
but is it an overstatement to say that it is not? It is colonialism. I think it is an expedition that was bound to be a
Mm-hmm.
colonial expedition in the future. So
Sure.
Magellan was there to scout. There,
Mm-hmm.
okay. I will leave most of the facts to historians, but
Right.
I'm just trying to deduce based on certain patterns.
Right.
Just say counterfactual question: if Magellan didn't die in Mactan, what's the probability that he would come back in the Philippines with a larger fleet? And because
Sure.
that's what happened with Columbus. So
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, colonial policy at that time is tied with expeditions, and expeditions are risky. So
Right.
you cannot conduct a colonial project without knowing where to land first and foremost. But eventually,
Sure.
it ended up like that. So Magellan was basically a
Right.
scouting expedition, and of course, I cannot remove the stains of colonialism on this issue because Magellan
Mm-hmm.
tried to convert natives.
Mm-hmm.
If you're simply there to trade or to establish trading
Right.
posts, then you could have
Mm-hmm.
done it and just trade the way the
Right.
Chinese did with the Zhenghe
Mm-hmm.
expedition that reached
Mm-hmm.
Africa. But they tried to convert
Right.
people. They tried to convert
Mm-hmm.
people and they tried to meddle with local politics. So, they're
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Magellan did a lot of things, and of course, most of those things are questionable. But now that
Mm.
commemoration is
Yeah.
always, celebrated with his death. Like,
Yeah.
especially in the pub materials that you've noticed that you
Yeah.
yourself did actually. Like, there is a lot of depictions of him being slashed by
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Lapu-lapu, who is our designated. Sabi nga, there was plans of doing a movie, ang unang bayani, the first hero, a warrior Lapu-lapu. He is our basically our prehistorical hero. But the thing
Mm.
is, we're here to examine not the historical facts, although they are our bedrock, but we're not going to contest the facts. But we are going to
Mm.
discuss the meaning behind it. Like, why do we always remember the Battle of Mactan? How is it
Mm.
important? And is it something that should be remembered? And are we
Mm.
remembering it, right? And not just factually correct, but also like, are we getting the right lessons from it? And
Mm.
so that is today. That is what we're going to discuss for
Yep.
episode 11. And
Yeah.
so let's begin with the basic facts. In March 16, 15, 21, that's when the fate of the Philippines was. It was in the Philippines back then, but it was just a group of islands. Technically, it
Mm.
was in Cebu, which was
Mm.
it's not the colonial capital, which was Manila, but it was the spot where the first Spanish edition arrived.
Mm.
Now, of course, the tendency there is the reason why it's so iconic was it was a battle depicting a quote unquote native
Mm.
represented by Lapu-lapu and his faction,
Mm.
and a foreigner, and it's always
Mm.
depicted with him personally and Magellan personally fighting. And they were and they're and of course there's always when people retell these battles. In fact, my father used to tell the Battle of Mactan as a bedtime story. He would say that these warriors defeated them despite being well armored, better
Mm.
equipped, more technology advanced. So yeah, did I miss anything, or what do you say about the basic facts of this story of
No,
Mactan?
no, I think that's those are the basic facts. Other than the basic fact is Lapu-lapu is an old chief at that
Mm-hmm.
time, so he's probably not involved in the battle directly.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then again, the myths that we formed there. So,
Mm.
how can a bunch of armored Spaniards be defeated by a bunch of hunky
Oh
warriors?
yeah,
That's always a
I mean
depiction.
there. Yeah, it's funny. Like if you notice, like Ambeto Campo noticed this, but most of our statues of Lapu-Lapu were
Yeah,
like it gave him a six pack. They called him like
yeah.
Conan the Barbarian, but in reality, according to records, he was probably about 70 years old,
Yeah.
probably as old as Duterte actually, which is like a weird image.
So, so,
So
so,
yeah,
so, so Spanish armor didn't work against Philippine guns.
oh, Philippine guns. We
Guns.
had guns of our own. Yeah, but and probably that not all of them were like that fit. But okay, so what did it mean? More or less, like it represents that fantasy, no, not a fan, but the idea that a
Mm,
Filipino can successfully fend off a foreign invader.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, his history would say that Magellan came in
Mm,
and actually established quote unquote amiable diplomatic relations with
mm,
Homabon.
mm,
And so he wasn't outright violent. Of course, you can argue he
mm,
had ulterior motives, but really, it's not. You write a movie about it. He isn't exactly uh, at all villainous, and yet we remember him as the bad guy.
mm,
And Lapu-Lapu, like what we mentioned earlier, he's actually an old chief, but the victory would always be attributed to the leader. So of course he got the victory, but really the real warriors are unnamed.
mm,
But yeah, that's the basic idea. The fact that we maintain that we can win, but in
mm,
fact it's not necessary. That here's the thing: we have to establish that the story of the Filipino nation, technically, the term Filipino started
mm,
already deep into the tail end of the colonial period of Spain
mm,
under the group called Ilustrados, a bunch of
mm,
educated Filipino children of elites,
mm,
sometimes elites to be, but
mm,
mostly elites. And they said that, nomos los indios bravos, some people say, we are the
mm,
brave indios. But instead of
mm,
like just calling themselves indios, and they've
mm,
reappropriated indios, meaning natives,
mm,
sometimes connoting lack of civilization. They
mm,
just use the term for everyone, Filipinos, which
mm,
was reserved for everyone, including the Spanish-born in the
mm,
colonies.
mm,
Basically, people born and raised in the Philippines. So
mm.
it began there, but not in with Lapu-Lapu. Lapu-Lapu was not a Filipino.
Yeah.
So why do you think we try to claim Lapu-Lapu as Filipino when in fact he never called himself a Filipino? He just called himself Lapu-Lapu.
But I think it's part of nation building. It's part of identity building to try to find your root. But the curious thing is that something that I would note, and you're right, the idea of a Filipino emerged out of our interaction with our
Mhm.
colonial masters, with our colonizers. So I want to be a bit more specific with that. It's not because our identity just emerged out of the colonial period. It is formed out of our interaction with our colonizers, with an outsider, to be more specific.
Mm.
So if we are to, again, identity building is about setting boundaries, about determining who you are, who is with you, who is your tribe, and that
Mm.
requires an outsider. So,
Mhm.
and in doing so, you must also try to go back to a time wherein the colonizers have yet to arrive, and more or less the first encounters, to be more specific, the first
Mhm.
encounters with the other. That's why Lapu-Lapu is being absorbed in our
Mhm.
Filipino identity, because it is the first time we encountered that great
Mhm.
outsider, that great outsider. And
Mm.
this is not unique for the Philippines. This is true for nation building around the world. So the
Mhm.
identity of nations in Europe were built not out of a vacuum, but out of
Mhm.
their first encounter with an outsider. For example, the,
Mhm.
the idea of a German nation, before it became solidified by, of course, the machinations and diplomacy and war
Mhm.
making of Bismarck. he used France as that great outsider when he unified Germany. But the identity of a German nation was built on their interaction with the Romans. It was their resistance against the Romans that formed the bedrock of a Germanic identity. Yeah, same thing with the Spaniards. How the hell did the Spaniards gain their identities as Spaniards? It's their interaction with their Muslim overlords. So that's when they started to
the
have
Moors.
the Moors. That is when they started. But then again, this is their identity was built upon their resistance against the Moors. So you have the pockets of Christian kingdoms, small Christian kingdoms. Asturias would be one that became the seed of a Spanish identity. So that's one thing. So it's based on this, the first encounter, always the first encounter with that great other that is the bedrock of national identities.
Right. The problem with that is, a lot of these things with the first encounter is that there are not a lot of facts. The fact that it's in prehistoric means it's before history. There's not a lot of sources from that era. In fact, to this day, there are still debates on whether the first communities, Filipinos, were like this way or like that way. In fact, it was recently debunked that the land bridges of Dr. H. Otley Bayer. So
that's
on how people came here.
That's already debunked way before.
Exactly. But well, the thing is, my point is it's the basis for such a myth is based on mostly imagination and not a lot on historical fact. And really, we discussed this before, that really good myths are usually based on good history. It distorts, but it has to be like somewhat ethical distortion. So I suppose maybe my question here is, knowing that there's a risk of basing a myth on prehistory, how do we tread that ground?
Yeah, the thing is, well, I would recognize that we must get our facts straight. That's the first step. But the next step would be to simplify. But regarding the land bridges, why is it still the idea that Filipinos came from Malays, Indonesians, and Indians, when in fact it was the other way around?
It came from us.
Actually, the earlier humans are found here in the Philippines before they moved to Indonesia and Malaysia. So I'll check my facts with that one. But regarding the land bridges, again, if it's debunked, but how can you change what has been taught in schools? So it is also a matter of education for generations. What are the stories we tell? And stories are, of course, they're distinct from facts. They need not be separate. And that's what myths are. They need not be separate, but they are distinct. So the stories we tell, and again, the stories we tell regarding the Battle of Mactan, regarding the arrival of Magellan, is that we defeated the Spaniard. And that's why the question for our advertisement is, why do we want to kill Magellan? So it reflects this want to subdue another, the great other.
And I think that is an ethical question that that is central to our topic today, because the problem with that is it reifies a nationalism that motivates the hostility and aggression and even supremacy over foreigners, which is problematic in this globalized and multicultural world. That's what a lot of people somewhat try to control, or this technically like this anti-colonial bloodlust that we have noticed. Like a lot of people are angry that, well, some people find this in bad taste because it reenacts the entry of colonialism, when in fact it's not the outward, like it's not the explicit extension. It's celebrating connection, because technically, and I'm not trivializing the wounds and scars we had from colonialism, but the fact is they're the ones that made us a part of the world, as the globalizing world at that time. One of the earliest examples of the globalization is the galleon trade. They brought us all sorts of new food products and new artifacts and new items, and new languages, new the new people came in and out. It's like
The Black
we had
Nazarene. The Black Nazarene.
the Black Nazarene, yeah. So it made us a part of the connected us with a part of the world. So there are things that are it's not all bad. What I'm saying here, and there's not we can't throw away the baby with the bathwater. But is there? That's why this kind of myth that is the nativist sentiment of like Lapu-lapu over the foreign Magellan is somewhat problem. I suppose I find it in a way problematic because the fact that you should like, I suppose yeah, this is from the lecture of Campo, who said that he even proposed
VR.
amusement park virtual reality where you would be pretend to be Lapu-lapu and continue to hack Magellan. You know,
That would be nice.
So do you? Yeah. Well, okay. What can you say about this technical bloodlust? I mean, I personally find it somewhat problematic. But what do you? You have a counterpoint.
Okay. Before I answer, why do you find it problematic? Is it because it is archaic? Is it because it's unmodern? Is it because it's not aligned with culture of globalization? Why do you find it? Why do you find it problematic?
I think that's already. I think you already said that. You know, it's it promotes a culture of like violence and intolerance towards a foreigner. When in fact, in this day and age, in order to enrich your own identity and culture, it's through interaction with the other.
That's
so how. Yeah, in a way, of course, it's presuming like a mature self to withstand like interaction with the other. Otherwise, if you have a weak sense of self, then you only feel threatened. So I suppose, well, that's what I think. But I'll let you build your case.
You know, that's my problem with that. You may say that it's not aligned with the times right now, but the Philippines was never aligned with the times. We're not aligned with the times now because we haven't grown out of such bloodlust, and the only way that you can grow out of a bloodlust is to name it.
You know, name it and then
name it, recognize it, celebrate it until you get. I think you get over it, but we haven't gotten over such things because it is the bloodlust that we have. It's to an extent. I had this exchange with one of our colleagues, Professor Torneo, and to an extent he was right. The bloodlust of Filipinos, our capacity to kill, is prevalent. It's everywhere, but it is not sublated. Let's just say it's not recognized. It's not integrated into our systems. And your sentiments, to an extent, is the cause of that. That you find it archaic. You find it out of this current timeline. Well, it is. That's one thing. And I don't think we should judge the Philippines based on relatively modern standards at this point. So there are times wherein such bloodlust must be celebrated in order for people to just get saturated by it and get it over. But until that time, it would always emerge in very amusing ways, like getting a president elected who more or less is violent against foreigners.
Except for the Chinese, apparently.
Except for the Chinese. That's one thing. And I have another point that I need to make. Well, it is not all bad, but I think it's mostly bad because we're not the Spaniards were not the first ones to integrate us into a global system of trade. I mean, we have been trading with our neighbors for years, for centuries before the Spaniards arrived. So yeah, it's not all bad, but it's mostly bad. But yeah, it's not all bad. You're correct partially, but I need to make that qualification. It is mostly bad. The galleon trade is, of course, it may have brought us some goods, but it was based on the destruction of our agricultural system. It became we produce cash crops instead of something to sustain our population. So, but yeah, regarding the bloodlust, regarding this want to kill Magellan, we should bloody celebrate it. We should make it more explicit until we get over it. Then we grow.
And how do you propose we do that?
No, probably follow Ambito Campos' advice and have a VR.
Of killing Magellan, you know.
But I think it's also based on the stories we tell. And to an extent, we should let me just entertain arguments. We can just try to stop correcting things at this point and just emphasize that yes, we whacked a Spaniard.
Then again, when you say that we, you know, where did this we come from? Because when you say we were trading with his neighbors, is it the we as in the Philippines, or we as in certain tribes in certain areas in the geography which is soon to be the Philippines?
Yeah, I think
Because
we.
technically, whether
Mm,
you like it or not, there would be no Philippines if there were no Spaniards. And technically, they united us under territory through their colonial, I suppose, boxes that we put us in. But
mm.
technically, as a result, we became we became like a country because of them, and we got our name from it. Again, I'm not celebrating it, but it is the way it is.
It could have been
Again, we can't.
something else.
hmm I read it somewhere that if we weren't taken over by the Spanish, we'd probably eventually be taken over by the British anyway, or something, which was taking over Malaysia and Burma. So I suppose. Uh, and some people would say that it's even they're even it would probably be far worse. The Spaniards weren't that explicit or that thorough in their control. It was mostly the corrupt friars. But again, same thing. But we could have been far worse under the French or the Portugal. But again, that's neither here or there. So that's just speculation. But it is the way we are. They made it the way we are. So what's the point of imagining like much different? What you're saying about something being different?
That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just to balance out your argument that we would not be like this without the Spaniards, we would have been something
Mm-hmm.
else. And that would more or less tie your argument to this relatively senseless counterfactuals and speculation. I
Mm-hmm.
think the problem right now is what
Mm.
we do with what happened. It is
Right.
not about, okay, we can condemn what happened all day long, and those condemnations are correct. I would say it
Mm-hmm.
simply: the Spaniards were messed up colonizers.
Mm-hmm.
They had opportunities to reform, and there were some reformist Spanish governor generals. One of them got killed by the friars. so, so,
Mm-hmm.
so, but
Right.
overall they messed up so many things. So it's not all
Of
bad, but
course.
it's mostly bad. And
Mm-hmm.
then again, this is
Right.
just trying to make sense of the past. I think
Sure.
what we do now is to try to bring that past
Mm-hmm.
to our future, because it is a memory. Let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I would not call it the
Sure.
baggage. I would not call it the
Uh-huh.
baggage, but it is a memory. It is a
Mm-hmm.
memory. So I think the question of why do we want to kill Magellan, it is not supposed to be answered from a historical perspective, but it should
Mm-hmm.
be answered from a political psychological perspective. Why do we
Mm-hmm.
keep on remembering one of our few decisive victories over the outsider,
Mm-hmm.
over an outsider?
Mm.
So
Mm.
but yeah, well, why
Yeah.
do you think so? Why do we keep on commemorating this victory over an outsider? Why not
I
the other
mean,
battles? Why not the other battles?
mm, fair point, because as I've established, I don't believe Lapu-lapu to be part of an us. It's a fabrication that seems a bit forced,
Yeah,
and yeah, and
okay, you're right. Historically, he's not. By
mm-hmm.
fact, he is not. But
Mm-hmm.
we are now
Right.
discussing the realm of nation building.
Sure. Personally, I always think of nation building as in the active voice. What I mean by active voice, it means when one explicitly says, "I am Filipino. I am fighting for this country." Lapu-Lapu did not say that. Personally, I would celebrate those that at least tried to fight, even though they lost. It was done under the banner of the Philippines. The thing is, this is not a new debate, and Nick Joaquin actually wrote on this. And the thing is, he actually dealt with the people who tried to be nativists, who sought
Mm,
a Philippine origin in the
mm,
prehistory and romanticized
mm,
the time when we were tribal. We had anitos, diwatas, and all the fairy tales and the what do you call that? Those amulets.
mm. Anting-anting.
Anting-anting, the times when we had amulets and fought with swords and arrows. The thing is, he said this. It's very quotable and it's very powerful. And he said that culture is history, and history is culture,
Mm,
and history begins with dates. And the most important beginning of those dates are 1521 and 1565. Um, so, in other words, it is only through the history that we can build myths on, and the beginning. Well, albeit
not
it's in the
necessarily.
tippy point, it's still based on speculation. So perhaps I would value more personally the battles fought by people who explicitly created the Filipino banner and fought under it.
Well, we lost most of those.
Lapu-lapu was not exactly. Yeah, that's true. And I get the point, but it wouldn't be honest to ourselves as a country.
It is okay. Let me ask you one thing. Do you know any successful case of nation building that did not appeal to not prehistory, but to people who didn't fight for a specific identity?
No, in fact, that's the point of foundation. Foundation is the starting point of that new identity, and of course, that foundation would originate from someone who did not come from that moment of foundation. It's somewhat foreign to that extent. But Lapu-lapu was not that founder. We have elected him like without his consent as a founder, quote unquote, even though he did not have that act of founding. He didn't found anything. The founding fathers did it for their own interest, but eventually they founded something. They wrote a constitution, a document, an artifact, a tangible form that they continue to use to this very day. Lapu-lapu did not. It was based on, again, an imagination of certain historians. He was reimagined as someone who was young, virile, strong, but in reality, he was discovered he was an old man. So it's a figment of historical imagination. So if we were to be honest, we should probably focus on people who have explicitly founded the Philippines, even with failures. It is an honest failure. It's an honest moment of foundation.
So I think who's the better candidate?
It's not who's better and who's not.
No, it is at this point.
Who is?
It is who is the better candidate, because Lapu-lapu can be a candidate because he was the one who first fought. Again, the first encounter. He was the first one to resist. And he embodies this need for resistance. But then again, as you said, he did not found anything. So who's the better one? The Gohoy, Silang.
The thing is, I think it's clear that the only candidates should be found would be in the Philippine Revolution. Those are the only candidates that can be considered. Otherwise, and as far as I'm concerned, though, they do not belong to us just because they won, or if the Gohoy didn't even win. In fact, it's not based on winning or losing. It is based on,
not to an extent, it is
able to establish an identity.
It should be. It should be based on winning. Why shouldn't it be based on winning? But then again, you're right. You need not win. So I think Gabriela Silang would be a better founder. Gohoy would have been a better founder.
In
so
what sense?
That's probably
I'm curious. What did Gabriela Silang found? Technically, was she revolutions or revolts?
Well, the movement was relatively organized. They occupied a certain space. They had more or less effective government. Effective enough that the Spaniards needed them to retake Manila against the British. There were no constitutions. You're judging it based on Western standards, writing a constitution. You need not write a constitution. King Arthur didn't write a constitution. William the Conqueror didn't write a constitution. Arminius of Germany did not write a constitution.
Well, not constitution per se, but they did establish a tradition that is still passed down and can be traced to them. Gabriela Silang did not. We simply know their name. I am not familiar with the details of their government, although I would be interested in learning them. But the fact that we are not all aware of that government, that kind of speaks for itself.
No, that more or less speaks for a lack of attention to that revolt. Not the quality of the revolt itself. It's just a lack of attention to that revolt.
Sure. And again, this is a debate better had by historians. But I suppose the more important question which we can answer right now is this. How do we deal with our colonial past, knowing that it will always be tainted? I mean, we always have this hostility towards that. That's part of that. Its fascination with killing Magellan, etc. But the fact is, technically, people who are Philippine citizens have a bit of Spanish blood in them. Will we all? And technically,
not really.
Not really. But there are some people, like the Ayalas, the Madrigals,
the elite,
and all the other Spanish name, the elites. They still exist today with some Spanish mestizo blood, and to this day, there will be some sort of, I suppose, hostility towards them because they they might be seen as collaborators or part of the colonizing. But technically, it's a good illustration that the colonial will always be a part of us. And how do we deal with that? Is there another way of looking at that or dealing with that reality?
I think the colonial is a part of us, not because we share Spanish blood. I think the colonial is part of us because we have this keen sense of outsiders. We are always looking for outsiders.
Right, like how whenever there's a actor or celebrity that comes in, we flock to them, and something like that, or like the fact that we consume important goods, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that's one way of us trying to handle this need to find an outsider.
Yeah. So as opposed to finding an outsider, what should we do to move forward as a country?
And I think we go back to the old question: who is supposed to be our founder? And for that, I have many arguments, but I think, in general, let's just put it that way. In a general term, we must find a founder. I think of course, we have the people who support Bonifacio as the founder. Which is, I think I'm part of that group, Bonifacio to be that founding entity.
Interesting. I mean, the fact that
the founder,
I suppose that's it's for so many histories, the founder is usually clear. The founder is establishes something, can still pass it down. And I suppose looking for that standard is somewhat, right now, I can only say that I'm not sure anyone has passed down anything possibly, except, Mambini tried to create a panukala framework for government, a constitution. But in reality, I suppose the closest to a founder we do have, even though he used a lot of American resources, is Manuel Quezon. He established Filipino as a national language. He created the presidential system for all its faults, and but also for some of its benefits, I suppose, mostly faults. I suppose Quezon could be a founder in that sense, but otherwise, it is an open discussion that we have to have with ourselves, with our country. How do we look at history? That'll be an interesting thing to do. There's another thing about this, like, in a way, connected to this question. How do we continue to engage with, say, our former colonizers, say, for example, America or Spain? Because technically there are still Spanish people coming in every day, every so often for as tourists, and even the crew, of the Elcano, who are attractive male sailors, and people fawn over them. Is there something wrong with that, or do we have? I mean, technically, whether we like it or not, this globalized world, we coexist with other countries, even former colonizers. Should they still bear the guilt of that colony? And the fact, in the same way you argue we should still bear the pain of those scars and process it, should they bear that guilt as well?
I think no. I think Filipinos have a keen sense of distinction.
Sure.
I think we want to just kill political entities, and they're not political entities, they're private individuals. I don't think it would spill out. I think Filipinos are still hospitable. Sure. Hospitable to foreigners, so I don't think we have to fear any racial discrimination against them. But it doesn't mean that we should not celebrate this bloodlust. We should celebrate our, more or less, first and foremost, how we whacked Magellan. Then we have other. We also have other victories against the Americans when we actually surprised. I forgot where that damn battle was. We actually surprised the Americans and massacred an entire unit. These are things that we should remember. We should commemorate these things, and in doing so, we also remember how Filipinos were killed, how Filipinos were massacred by the Americans. By the for the Japanese, I think we have been over it to an extent. We have been over this. We're done with the Japanese issue. We're done with the Japanese issue because we have overemphasized how how we were massacred by the Japanese. I think we got over that bloodlust against the Japanese, but we still have two more colonizers to deal with. So we need to deal with that bloodlust against the Americans and against the Spaniards. So I think we need to process this by letting it out. just commemorating
Right.
each significant moment wherein we massacred Americans and Americans massacred Filipinos. So
Right.
that's also part of our identity building. We need to remember those things, and we need to teach students that those things happened. So we let the society, we let our society learn from it. I will not say what things we should learn from it, but whatever we learn from it would more or less reflect our own values.
Fascinating. I mean, I do empathize with the need to process it, to let things out. It's I suppose the psychotherapist, kind of ways. You have to go through it, say it out loud, saying these happened. They spilled our blood, we spilled theirs, And in that's in a way, I'm not sure if there's a society that openly said that, like, hey, I spilled your blood, you spilled mine. Let's make peace and move forward. I'm not sure if there's a country like that.
Well, I think France and Germany ran through such processes for centuries. Eventually, they ended up right now. They needed to pass through that phase. I mean, Hitler declared France as Germany's natural enemy, and people agreed with him. And he's not the first one to say such a thing.
Right.
He's not the first one to say such a thing. That's a common German sentiment.
Right.
That France was actually their closest enemy, really. And that can be traced back to an old family rivalry.
British also still.
You have that. You need to pass by. You need to pass through those.
Yeah. The same way in how I think similarly, of course, everyone hates France. France and Great Britain, they used to be bitter enemies. And to the point where a lot of French people now live in the UK and vice versa, and how they joke about how they hate each other for no apparent reason, but there were real reasons, including the wars that they fought hundreds of years ago. And that's one way for national healing or international healing. But I suppose one thing I can say, and just to pose, not to say that I'm completely against what you're saying. I think that would be a great process. In fact, it would be great if we can laugh about the Battle of Mactan together with a Spaniard or a Portuguese, Magellan's Portuguese. But one thing I can say, one alternative way is, the same way how sometimes there are times where you really need to forgive people even though they cannot or they choose not to ask for forgiveness, or even though you fought with them and things happened and you have no opportunity to interact with them again, set forgiveness, they're already dead or whatever. It's simply just something to process. It's not about, like, for instance, it's the same way. The logic is same way on how, for example, you suffered a heartbreak in McDonald's. You never go to McDonald's again, or at the side of a boat docking in Cebu. Or do you cower in fear and say that's colonialism? It's like, nah, it's just celebrate for what it is. It is a PR stunt, perhaps a bit in bad taste, but there's something to. There's still something to celebrate, which is the ingenuity of voyage, and the Pacific and all of that. New knowledge gained, a new relationship gained. Dysfunctional, but in order for it to move on, I suppose we simply need to accept it. You know what I mean? Like, just as is, because in a way, yes, we have bloodlust, but there are also, they're still a part of us, not just in blood, but in culture. Most of the words we use are still Spanish. By our will or not, so I think that's one way to do it, although not everyone is capable or psychologically capable of that. So I suppose it is for the nation to decide how we can heal from this. That these are two alternative options that are viable. All right, so that was a hearty discussion, and hopefully we can continue it. And this is not the last one. We're going to talk about colonialism, but this is the first of a series. So, but for now, let's move on to recommendations. Where we recommend books, novels, movies, documentaries, or whatever materials that can help supplement the discussion we had today. So, what do you have to recommend this time, Borge?
I have a portrait of Magellan that you can kick.
That'll be a great business idea, by the way, or a punching bag.
Punching bag with Magellan's face on it. Seriously, I always drew Magellan when I was a kid. I don't know. I always had this fascination with the Battle of Mactan, and I always get into the details of the armor.
I I see.
Anyway,
See, it's
so
appreciation of
yeah,
colonialism as well. A
to an extent.
perverse one. Yeah.
we
Yeah.
are we are all products of colonialism. Even our reactions to colonialism is a product of the entire process. So better look at it
Mm-hmm.
from a dialectical perspective. But for my
Mm-hmm.
recommendation, I think I would recommend two things. First would be the documentary "The End of Poverty." I know you don't like documentaries, but for the sake of those
Mm-hmm.
who do like documentaries, this is one good introduction on the economic implications, long-term economic implications of colonialism. And this is something suffered by, of course, Latin American countries and to an extent us, but they suffered more. But
Mm-hmm.
well, they got over it because they were able to defeat the Spaniards. So good for them.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next recommendation I have is a set of essays, collection of essays by Damon Woods, entitled "The Myth of the Barangay and Other Silenced Histories." So
Mm-hmm.
this is one nice exploration. It's a perspective. I think one of the main essay would be about the political usage of the barangay. So basically, it as a political mechanism formed during Marcos's regime, even if prehistory points to the word banwa or bayan as something a bit more
Mm-hmm.
significant as a political
Mm-hmm.
unit than barangay. So yeah,
Right.
myths, we build and bust myths.
Mm-hmm. Right. Fascinating. In fact, I want to get the copy of that book as well. It's very
Mm.
fascinating. So barangay is not the real political unit, but banwa or
Or bayan.
bayan. So
Yeah.
yeah. So it's all a lie. That I was shocked when you first told me that. Yeah, that was
Well,
cool.
according to
Uh,
Damon Woods. Okay, according to Damon Woods.
according to Damon Woods, who is not a Filipino scholar, you know. But yeah. Anyway, uh, worth reading too. These are all available, I suppose, in Shopee, yeah,
Yeah, I
or
think so. Yeah,
wherever.
yeah.
Okay. For me, I also have two recommendations. Number one is the lecture that Humberto Campo gave. I
Mm,
think there are two versions. The shorter version is the Arete lecture, which is on YouTube, and the
mm,
second one he gave at the Centennial, I think. I forgot. Well, the it was in the presidential communications office.
mm,
It was featured in Facebook. I can send the link. It's
mm,
still up, I think, on Facebook. People can watch it. They basically talk about the same thing on how we process Magellan, and he talks about precisely about how Lapu-lapu is a myth and how we continue to commemorate it. So if you enjoyed the
mm.
parts where we mentioned about the VR, that's where he introduced it. And also how he changed history and how Magellan did not discover. Most people say he discovered it,
Oh yeah,
he, or he most or rediscover it. It's actually how he arrived. He simply arrived. He
he
didn't
just landed here.
discover. He just landed here. And the second thing is also a book that I actually used to prepare for this episode. It's called Culture and History by Nick Joaquin, who is well, I've recommended his book before, but this one is a collection of essays about various historical topics. Some about the Santo Nino,
Mm,
another one about a menu, which is odd. But the two essays that are quite important, the thing is, a lot of people consider Nick Joaquin to be, well, some people find him to be a god uh, in Philippine writing. He mastered most of the genres of writing, but other people find him to be a bit of an iconoclast or a bit of a rebellious intellectual precisely because instead of repudiating or rejecting the colonial past, he somewhat accepts it, and not it and in a critical way. On one essay in particular called "Heritage of Smallness," he actually laments on the fact that Filipinos mostly, instead of buying whole cigarettes, they for tingi
tingi
tingi,
tingi.
you
Mm.
know, yeah, they buy per cigarette, or instead of like building skyscrapers or palaces, they buildings are shorter. So we have a heritage of smallness. We don't have any big visions or horizons. So he laments that part of Philippine history. And then, of course, there's history as culture. And I cited his point earlier on how, while he responded to this, he responded to the people who want to look for a prehistoric Philippines, when in fact it did not exist. He focuses on history as is, and rather than expel the colonial and the Hispanic portions of us. He simply wrote in a way to reintegrate that part of ourselves. This is part of who we are. Same way how a lot of people integrate trauma in who they are. And they don't always, well, some people use it to fuel their victim mentality. Others simply use it as a formative experience that makes them stronger. That's how basically that's what colonialism is a traumatic period, and you can use it to be a victim, or you can use it to be stronger and move forward as a nation. So, and I think these are discussions like these might actually help moving forward.
Is that available on Shopee as well?
I think so. In fact, they have a new cover. I actually have the old cover right here, back when National Bookstore sold books. But now I think you can buy it. Yeah, it's definitely available there under a new cover. So by Anvil. So yeah, so you can read it too. So it's very interesting. So thank you for joining us as usual. If you liked our episode, keep joining us. Follow us on Facebook, Spotify, Anchor, and even email us at pipodcastph@gmail.com. But until the next episode,
magandang gabi, mga kapiyan.